Families threatened with separation, children pulled out of school. Human rights groups are warning against the drastic measures imposed on Qatar. So how can human rights be protected in this political crisis in the Gulf? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. Toying with the lives of thousands of Gulf residents. That's what human rights organisations have said about the countries who've cut diplomatic ties with Qatar this week. On Monday, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates ordered Qatari nationals to leave their countries within 14 days. Their citizens were also given the same time frame to leave Qatar. As a result, hundreds of mixed families are facing the grim prospect of being separated from their loved ones. The US Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, has urged Saudi Arabia and its allies to ease their blockade on Qatar, saying it's causing unintended humanitarian consequences. And Amnesty International says its researchers have interviewed dozens of people whose human rights have been affected. It's released a statement saying these drastic measures are already having a brutal effect, splitting children from parents and husbands from wives, people from across the region, not only from Qatar, but also from the States. Implementing these measures risk losing jobs and having their education disrupted. Qatar's National Human Rights Committee has also responded, saying these steps result in tearing up families, disrupting businesses and interrupting students' education across the region. I'm happy to say we can bring in our guests who we quoted there. With me here first in the studio is Sultan Barakat, who's director at the Centre for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies at the Doha Institute. In London, we have James Lynch. He's the Deputy Director of Amnesty International's Global Issues Programme. And here in Doha, Saad Sultan Al Abdallah, Director of the International Cooperation Department at the Qatar National Human Rights Committee. Welcome to all of you. Big subject, so let's get straight on to it. James Lynch, I know that you were very involved in discovering the fallout of this Gulf dispute. Tell us more.
Yeah, that's right. I was in Doha this week, and we've spoken to more than 30 people affected by these issues this week, not just in Qatar, but also in Bahrain and in Saudi Arabia. I think Amnesty's spoken to something like people from 4 or 5 different nationalities affected by these issues. And I think that's really important to say that this is not just an issue of Qataris suffering as a result of these measures. It is people from Saudi Arabia, from Bahrain, from UAE, and from countries migrant workers come from, such as Bangladesh or Nepal. I think it's really important to say Amnesty doesn't take a position on the political dispute that is occurring, on the issues that are in dispute. What we take issue with is the impact this is having on ordinary people, who aren't involved in politics. And what are those impacts? Well, first of all, there is a huge impact on the right to family life, for many people across the region. There are, we understand from official figures, there are more than 11,000 Saudi Arabian nationals, Bahrainis and Emiratis living in Qatar. Now, many of them will have family ties in Qatar. This is putting people in a really difficult situation where they are at risk of they are either at risk or actually already separated from close family members. We've met people, parents split from their children in a different country. I met a Qatari man who cannot get to his family who are in the UAE. He actually was turned away at the border and was sent back just as this was announced. There are people who are split in a different country from their spouse. I'm thinking of a Qatari man whose Saudi Arabian wife is with a newborn baby of less than 2 weeks old. They are in Saudi Arabia. At the moment, it's very hard for these people to understand when will they next see these relatives. Additionally, I think the other sort of major rights issues that I want to flag up here is the right to freedom of expression. Across the region, and this is particularly in Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, the countries that have actually announced and implemented these measures. Those residents of those countries are now living in fear. They have been warned not to sympathise with Qatar. With the UAE Attorney General saying people could face up to 15 years in jail for doing that. If they do that, for example, through a tweet. Now we know that threats like that are not idle because we've seen multiple prosecutions for freedom of expression, for peaceful freedom of expression, and long sentences given to human rights defenders and others like them in recent
James,
years. So that's another important aspect here. Yeah.
Let's leave it there for a moment because I want to pick up. I mean, you mentioned several points there, several worrying issues, and I just want to pick up a few with Saad Sultan Al Abdullah here in Qatar. So I want to know what it is that you are experiencing, both from the people who have been told that they have to leave and from Qataris themselves. What are some of the stories that you've been hearing?
I have to mention that since the press conference that the NHRC held on Tuesday evening at 7:30 and the announcement of the hotline, since then, within 24 hours, we received over 300 complaints that came to the NHRC. And within 48 hours, we received over 400, and now today we are up to over 600 complaints.
That's a lot.
And this is not to mention the complaints that we receive by phone and by other means of communications, by emails, or that we monitor through social media and other means of monitoring. We received all sorts of kind of issues. I think the biggest and the obvious one is the right of free movement and the right of residency and other like the rights of private property. It affected all those people from all the four countries, whether it's from Qatar or Bahrain or Saudi Arabia or UAE. Those people have been residents in those countries for some of them for decades, and they have never been or not seldom been to their home country, let's say, and to be immediately rooted out from their place of residence and sent back to their countries where they have no homes. Some of them have no relatives, no.
So these
no
families'
social ties.
lives, I mean, thrown into total disarray. Families torn apart, separated. Children pulled out of school. Sultan Barakat, I mean, what was the thinking, the political reasoning for conducting such an act? Because also you're punishing your own people.
To be honest, I don't think there has been much thinking behind such a drastic measure. I would be very, very shocked if the other Gulf countries intended that much harm in terms of human rights and on the humanitarian level.
Well, what did they think it would be, if not painful?
Well, they thought that would bring Qatar back into fold, and it will only take maybe a few days, and things will fall into order. Now, I think Qatar has proven to be much more resilient than they initially imagined, particularly in terms of its economy and food security. Both on the economic front, the stock market has not collapsed as was anticipated at the beginning.
They did a dramatic plunge to a 7-year low in the beginning,
but
didn't it?
it's not a major collapse as you'd expect under the current circumstances. Sure. And the Qatari rial maintained its value, and they continued to have freedom for exchange and so on. The real harm is the social one, I think, and it's the one that's going to last much longer. We are in a region where family means a lot. Family in Ramadan in particular is that more important. The communities here are all interrelated. You have tribes that spread across borders. You have intermarriages, thousands of cases across the Gulf states. And they're all being given 14 days to make a decision between their family, loyalty to their family, and loyalty to their state and their citizenship. And I think that in itself is really an abuse of the right, because it leaves people in an incredible position, and it's so difficult to make a choice between these two. And ironically, I think we may end up seeing the first displacement, if that's the right expression, forced displacement within the Gulf as a result of those drastic measures.
Okay. all of you have been painting quite a dramatic picture of what it looks like, but we've got some images for you of how this plays out, because at least 8 human rights groups say the decision to cut diplomatic ties with Qatar violates the rights of nationals and foreigners living in the country and abroad. Bernard Smith has been speaking to one family who face being separated if a resolution isn't found.
We found ourselves lost. We may, be separated from our children and return back to Bahrain for no reason.
Wafa al-Waziri is Qatari. Her children were born here, but her ex-husband is Bahraini. As is the practice in the Gulf, the children can inherit only their father's nationality. Now Bahrain says its nationals must return within 2 weeks or risk losing their citizenship.
I feel this is more my home than I would call Bahrain. I've only been there for 4 times in my life. If it requires for me to live here, to stay here, would require me to give up my Bahraini passport, I would be more than glad to do that. This country has given me more than my own country has given me.
Citizens of the Gulf countries have the right to live, work and travel wherever they want in the region, so the passport they hold never mattered, until now.
In Gulf we have a blood relation everywhere, and we have a cousin in all these countries around us. And we believe that we are one country, and with the freedom of moving and married.
We don't want to be separated, like lots of families here. A lot of families are integrated between different countries in the Gulf region. Why should we be separated because of politics?
There are more than 11,000 Saudis, Bahrainis and Emiratis living in Qatar. Overnight, suddenly, they're in limbo, not knowing where they'll be able to call home. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera, Doha.
Sultan, we know that the spark of the fallout to this fallout was Trump's visit. It played a large role here. But the timing of this, you touched on it briefly, Ramadan. I mean, is that going to backfire? I know it's stoked a lot of anger and repugnance from countries in the region.
I think it will backfire, and it has already started. It's not just countries in the region, it's the Arab street and the Muslim street that I think has started to pick up the angry mood as a result of both the timing and the extent of the measures. The extent of the measures, nothing like this has ever been taken against Iran, which is identified as the arch enemy and the real cause of the problem. So why can't, if you don't implement any of this against Iran for many, many years, ever since 1979, Dubai has been the gateway for Iranian economy. And in fact, since the lifting of the sanctions, the American sanctions, the trade has reached a level of $40 billion a year between the United Arab Emirates and Iran. Now, you don't implement these measures against Iran and you come and implement it against your own family in Qatar. That, I think, is going to be the narrative that will lead the anger in the Arab streets.
Saad, what is Qatar going to do about it, about reuniting these families or stop them from being separated? What sort of leverage do you have here?
Speaking about the National Human Rights Committee as an independent body, an independent institution, I mean, since the implementation of the ban on travel ban and closure of the borders and so on, the NHRC immediately took some steps, tried to contact human rights bodies, human rights mechanisms. We have been in contact with other human rights organizations such as Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch and others. We have contacted many special rapporteurs on the issues and on the violations that have been inflicted on those people. So we've been very active lately, and our main priority was at the beginning to document all those cases, as many cases as possible. We have established 3 hotlines dedicated to this issue, and we are working 24/7. We are receiving complaints in person from 9 o'clock in the morning until 5 in the afternoon, and then from 9 in the evening until 2 in the morning every day, regardless of whether it's weekend or otherwise. So
James, I'm wondering how, sorry, excuse me jumping in here. James, I'm wondering how seriously this is being taken, and let's take it back to the workers who've been left without any guidance as to where they're going to end up, particularly in Saudi Arabia. I mean, is this being taken seriously considering how workers often don't enjoy rights in this region?
No, and that's been an issue that hasn't attracted so much interest, although I will say I was also in Nepal earlier this week, and the Nepali media is full of stories, questioning how this crisis will affect Nepali migrant workers. Where, what we have seen so far is that, there are a number of properties owned by Qatari nationals in Saudi Arabia, and they often will, those people, and we've spoken to the owners of some of those properties, they employ migrant workers on those farms. They have Qatari residence permits. So, and normally they would come back to the border to renew their residence and their right to be in Saudi Arabia every few months. Now that looks, at the current situation, that border is closed, and their Qatari sponsors, who are sort of responsible for them under the laws of the Gulf, cannot get to them. So they are potentially in very serious limbo. And I think what we have concerns about, where we have seen this happen in other contexts in the Gulf, is that what may happen is they may be deported and arrested because they are arrested and deported because they will not have valid residence permits. The other alternative is that they are hired by somebody because they will ultimately not be able to legally work. They may be hired for work that is on a sort of illegal visa. So they will be undocumented workers, and again, at risk of exploitation, at risk of arrest. So again, these are things a bit like we were talking earlier about, did these countries know that these effects were likely? Well, they certainly should have done. When we're looking at the family separation issue, it's hard to see how these governments couldn't have been aware of the marital ties across the Gulf, that are, a major part of the society in the GCC states.
And it's a real message,
again,
I guess, to the outside world, isn't it, how these countries are prepared to behave to people who work in their country. I should imagine, Sultan, it's also not a great message from a business point of view. And I'm wondering where this also leaves Egyptians who are working here. There are thousands of them, probably in a better status or hold a better status to the workers that we've just been talking about. But what's going to happen there from the Egyptian point of view? Because Egypt seems to have been sidelined anyway.
Well, Egypt has been rather quiet in the last few days. And if I were in Sisi's position, I also would try to remain quiet because of the hundreds of thousands of Egyptian workers in Qatar. I think there must be a fear that Qatar may take similar measures and demand that workers leave Qatar. And so far, they haven't done so. They've dealt with the whole thing, really, I think, in a rather dignified way. And they've allowed the Egyptians to continue to stay in the country. Having said that, now we're reaching end of school season and the start of the holidays. Those people traditionally would go back to Egypt. And I suspect many of them will be very, very frightened, very scared of going back, not knowing whether they'll be able to come back again. They'll be interrogated in Egypt, or anything could happen. So many families will probably decide to stay in country, and that will add on their stress and their resources and so on.
Now, people we know that will possibly leave and never come back, Hamas, other names that have been given to the government. How wise a move was that call? And I'm asking you that because Hamas represents a lot in this region. The Palestinian cause is sacrosanct. And when you start messing with that, it's going to upset a lot of people in this region.
Well, they have been messing with it for some time. And the way they've done it is that they've reduced Hamas to Gaza and to some sections within Gaza, which is totally unrealistic at the moment. Qatar's relationship with Gaza and with Hamas is absolutely important for the stability of Gaza. It's not known internationally, but Qatar is the only or the main donor that has remained supporting Palestinians in Gaza. And in effect, they're putting a lid over an explosive situation. Now, if this situation continues and the Qataris have no access to Gaza anymore, God knows what will happen over the summer. The Hamas leadership as such was offered place in Qatar. But late last year, there were new elections in Hamas, and the leadership, in fact, now is in Gaza itself, back in Palestine. So, in effect, they no longer host the leadership of Hamas in Qatar. There are individuals, and I think all those individuals are very, very important to maintain contact with if we are ever to see a reconciliation between a Palestinian reconciliation. Otherwise, again, you sever relationships and there's no way for them to communicate directly.
Communications, James, let's go back to the clamping down of freedom of speech. When something like this starts, do those measures often remain in place in countries under authoritarian rule? I mean, is that one of the problems here, that once we've started this, it's not going to stop?
Well, you know, what you've had now over a number of years in almost all of the GCC countries, to be honest, is a series of laws around cybercrime, around the protection of society and around defamation that are very vaguely worded, that are very broad, and essentially allow the state to prosecute people when they feel they would like to for crossing a sort of unstated red line. I mean, there are some red lines that are stated, things like insulting heads of state or insulting the judiciary. But a lot of this is subject to the whims and fancies of prosecutors. So you've seen, for example, people in many states in the region have been prosecuted for criticizing the conduct of the war in Yemen. You've seen that in Kuwait, in Bahrain, in the UAE, and long prison sentences following these. So I think you have to see this in that context, that this is the latest use of those repressive, anti-free speech laws, essentially. And I said again, I wouldn't take lightly these comments by all three states that were issued within a few hours of each other, saying sympathizing with Qatar is will be treated as a cybercrime, will carry a prison sentence.
So I'm sure that clamping down on freedom of speech doesn't make your job any easier, and I know you've taken it all the way to the top as far as the UN is concerned. Have you been told, though, that this crisis is in any way going to be over anytime soon?
Our main focus is to remain focused on the humanitarian side. We've been in contact with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mr. Zaid bin Raad. We've been in contact with other stakeholders in the region. We've been in contact with the Arab League, with the Charter Committee or the Human Rights Committee of the Arab League. We've been in contact with the Islamic Cooperation Council and precisely the Permanent Human Rights Department and the Islamic Cooperation Council. And this is just the first steps. And as I said, we are focused on documenting the cases. We are forwarding all those documented cases to international organizations. Yesterday, we sent our reports to over 300 human rights organizations around the world, and we are still. This is just the beginning, and we keep working until these situations are worked. I just want to emphasize a few points. One of those points are those three countries announced a 14-day grace period for residents, to leave their countries or to go back to their countries. And what we have seen actually in practice is those citizens are asked to either, let's say, Qatari citizens of those three countries are forced to leave immediately. Some of them not even allowed to access their homes or apartments to take their stuff before going to the airport. So they're forced to leave with the clothes.
Okay, sorry, we're running out of time now. I just want to get a last comment very quickly from Sultan. Politically, from the maneuvers that we've seen, is the worst over? I mean, is there any reason for us to believe that this horror facing those people forced out of the country, being forced out of the country, is going to end anytime soon?
I'm afraid not. I think we're going to see some more in the coming week or two. And to be honest, the mixed messages that are coming from Washington do not help. To have the president saying one thing and then the State Department saying something else does not encourage the Gulf states to focus their mind on resolving this issue.
Okay, let's leave it there, gentlemen. It was very good talking to you and getting your thoughts on this issue. Sultan Barakat with me here in the studio. James Lynch in London, also in Doha, Saad Sultan Al Abdallah. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. Mine is @Jane Dutton. Let's leave it there. Thanks for watching.